transfusions. In today's time, they are a relatively straightforward procedure that, unfortunately, some of us will have to undergo in our time. For some patients, blood transfusions are a literal lifeline and are the difference between life and death. But how did we get to a point where we were able to transport blood from one human to another? Well, we got here due to the hundreds of experiments and tireless work of biologists, physicians, and other scientists. June 15th, 1667 is the date of the first official blood transfusion to a human, and whilst this seems like a success story for the history books, this story is just as gruesome as it is bloody. Up until 1667, scientists, physicians, and other academics had been pondering and studying the human circulatory system. These studies were most prominent in England and France, with the two countries battling it out to see who could be the first to understand human blood and transfuse it. Some older French physicians stayed away from these new, outlandish ideas. That was, apart from one person, Jean-Baptiste Denis, a French physician and the personal physician to King Louis. Jean had studied medicine in Montpellier and quickly fell into the idea of blood transfusions and blood studies. In the 1660s, the French and English found themselves engaged in a battle of wits and intelligence, and Jean found himself smack bang in the middle of this. Physicians from the two countries began by performing transfusions on dogs, with varying rates of success. Once these experiments began yielding better results, they turned their attention to human subjects, and this was when Jean completed the first documented blood transfusion. On June 15th, 1667, a 15-year-old boy was brought to Jean for a transfusion after having lost too much blood. The 15-year-old boy, whose name we still don't know, had been bled by 20 leeches by a barber in an attempt to cure his ailments, but of course this was to no avail. Luckily, by the time he reached Jean, he hadn't yet died of blood loss, and Jean was able to work his magic. Jean brought the boy into his office and injected 12 ounces, which is around 354 millilitres, of sheep's blood into his body. Miraculously, the boy survived, and according to his parents, he was, quote, cured the very next day. Human blood and sheep's blood aren't compatible, so the boy was incredibly fortunate that the amount transfused to him was negligible. Whether the boy was really cured the next day or not remains to be seen, but this was exactly the success story that Jean needed. Jean-Baptiste Denis had officially completed the first documented blood transfusion, and now nothing could stop him. Not even murder. With newfound confidence in his abilities, Jean-Baptiste set about looking for a new subject, or victim, and that subject was Antoine Maury, who was known across Paris for his bizarre behaviour and exploits. In reality, Antoine was mentally ill and required psychiatric care for his illness, not a host of bizarre experiments conducted on him in the name of science. As this was 1667, the attitudes toward mental illness are a far cry from what they are today, and Jean-Baptiste and his team believed that they could cure him by replacing his, quote, bad blood with good blood. This was a common belief held at the time, which is why bloodletting was so popular. Antoine was taken from the streets of Paris against his will and forced into the hands of Jean-Baptiste and his team of mad scientists. At no point did Antoine consent to the procedure he was about to endure, but nobody present cared or even cared to ask. As far as they were concerned, they were doing him a favour by ridding him of his madness. Antoine was tied to a chair and a needle was forced into his arm. It was estimated that at least 177 millilitres of calf's blood was transfused into his system against his will. Jean-Baptiste and his team chose calf's blood as they figured that a calf would be pure and innocent, and that by extension, its blood would transfuse that pureness and innocence into Antoine's system. Those in attendance jeered as Antoine struggled against his binds, but the transfusion continued. As the hours passed, Antoine began sweating and complaining of a high fever. His armpits burned fiercely and he began passing urine that was almost completely black. Then the nosebleeds, nausea and diarrhea started. Jean-Baptiste freed Antoine and allowed him to rest, hoping that more calf's blood the next day would do the trick. Once the initial symptoms subsided, Antoine apparently appeared much more calm and docile, although it's fair to say that he was probably calm due to exhaustion and fever that was ripping through his body. After a few days, Antoine seemed a lot better and was allowed to go home and rest, and his wife was ordered to report back on his madness. In the coming months, Antoine's wife reported that he was much calmer than before, and hailed the procedure as a success. That was, of course, until the signs of madness began peeking through once more. This time, things were far worse, with Antoine's wife reporting that he was going wild on binges, feasting on alcohol, wine, and tobacco. Upon hearing the news, Jean-Baptiste knew exactly what to do, and Antoine was dragged in for yet another blood transfusion. Again, he was strapped down, poked and prodded with needles, and another 177 ml of calf's blood was transfused into his system. Just like before, the madness subsided, but the deadly symptoms and side effects were back once more. This time, his wife was more concerned for Antoine and began questioning the validity of Jean-Baptiste's methods. A third and final transfusion was performed despite the protest of Antoine's wife. This time, Antoine would not be so lucky, and as the procedure was underway, he fell into a fit of convulsions and the transfusion was stopped. Despite the best efforts of Jean-Baptiste and his team, Antoine died the very next day. The story quickly spread around Paris, and a year later, Jean-Baptiste found himself in front of a judge on charges of murder. He knew that if he was found guilty, he would be paying the ultimate price, with his life. During the trial, Jean-Baptiste was able to convince the judge that it was not his fault, and that Antoine had died, and that Antoine's grieving wife was actually to blame for his death. Jean-Baptiste addressed the court, telling them that arsenic poisoning mimicked the symptoms and side effects that Antoine was displaying during his transfusions, as well as the fact that arsenic induced madness, which may have explained his rapid mental decline. Jean-Baptiste also put forward the idea that Antoine's wife had paid rival physicians to testify against him and discredit him. He summarised that Antoine's wife had been poisoning him with arsenic powder and that the blood transfusions had nothing to do with his untimely death. Incredibly, Jean-Baptiste successfully managed to convince the court that he was innocent, and all of the charges against him were actually dropped. Despite being found innocent, his reputation was tarnished, and Jean-Baptiste spent the rest of his days as a professor, passing on his valuable knowledge to willing students. The French courts decided that blood transfusions could only be carried out at the discretion of the Paris Faculty of Medicine, a controversial ruling. Decades after his botched transfusions and public trials, Jean-Baptiste died aged 69 in 1704, leaving behind a strong legacy and research that has forever changed the medical landscape. If you like what you hear, you can support me on Patreon, just at True Crime Witch. I'm also on social media under True Crime Witch, and I also have a podcast that I released episodes every other week covering everything murderous, mysterious, and downright macabre. I will see you next time, and remember friends, stay safe and stay spooky.